O professor Dr. Jim Lengel é professor na Universidade de Nova York, nos Estados Unidos, graduado em Harvard, trabalhou em organizações ligadas ao setor acadêmico por 38 anos. Professor da Hunter College, é consultor de diferentes organizações, entre elas a Harvard University, a Apple Computers, IBM e The City University of New York. Autor de diversos livros sobre educação e comunicação, também publica uma coluna semanal e um podcast sobre ensino e tecnologia no site powertolearn.com.
Thank you very much, Professor Javier, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Cabral, for your opening of this very important conference. Thank you also, Professor Javier, for inviting me to Brazil. This country, with its beautiful countryside, its fast-growing economy, and its very active democracy, is like America was many years ago. You are among the leaders of the world in growth and change and investment in young people, investment in education. And I'm honored to be invited to this country and to Pernambuco State and to Recife to address you, and I hope to discuss with you education for the future. If you would like to follow along, if you have a mobile device, you may connect to, and you may follow along in English or in Portuguese. So please, if you have a device, connect it and follow it along. To understand education today, we must look back to history. 150 years ago, people in Brazil and in the United States worked on the land, outdoors, with hand tools in small groups. They did not travel far. The work did not change much from generation to generation. Daughters did the same work as their mothers and their grandmothers and their mothers before them with the same tools. They talked as they worked. Same for the sons and the grandfathers. The work groups included both old and young. The technology of work changed slowly. When the tools broke, the people could fix them themselves. We can call this Workplace 1.0. Now, let us look at the schools of those days. The students learned on the land, outdoors, in small groups. They did not travel far. They used simple hand tools in the school. The work groups at school included both old and young. Fathers and grandfathers went to the same school. They learned the same things. We could call this Education 1.0. Education and the workplace matched exactly. The school produced the kinds of citizens needed by the world around it. Someone who could work in a small group with hand tools, performing a variety of tasks each day, with a clear view of the world outside, with a small circle of connections. That was Education 1.0. It matched perfectly the workplace outside of school and produced the kinds of workers and citizens needed by the society. But 50 years later, the workplace changed. People went to work in factories, with mechanical tools. They worked in large groups, but they worked alone at their machine. This happened in Europe, this happened in the USA, this happened in Brazil, this happened in Asia. All over the world, the workplace changed. Everybody in the new workplace did the same thing at the same time all day long. They were not allowed to talk. They used paper and pencil, and they sat at desks. They were not very happy. Look at their faces. And they were closely supervised. Let us call this Workplace 2.0. This new workplace required a new set of skills and a new kind of citizen. And so, the schools changed to meet the needs of the new industrial economy. Students were formed into large groups, all of the same age. They were closed inside, the windows were shut up, and they worked according to the clock. They used mechanical tools, paper and pencil. They all did the same thing at the same time. They were closely supervised. Let us call this Education version 2.0. Again, education matched the workplace. In both places, people worked alone, but in large groups. They used mechanical tools. They did the same thing all day and had little connection with the world outside. Education 2.0 matched perfectly the workplace around it. All over the world, we changed our schools to match the economy and the democracy that was growing outside around the schools. We made a revolution in our schools just as we made a revolution in the workplace. Now, let us look at the workplace of today. Workplace 3.0. Very different from the factory. Most people today work in small groups. They solve problems together. They use digital tools. They present new ideas to each other. Robots do the mechanical work. People with clean hands reprogram the robots when things go wrong. People work on problems that no one has seen before. They must bring to bear chemistry, mathematics, biology, history, and literature to solve the problem. They must gather information in Workplace 3.0. They must gather information from many sources, most of it on the network, arriving in many different formats: images, graphs, diagrams, text, numbers, hypertext. They must be multitaskers. In order to survive in Workplace 3.0, they have a very different set of skills. They talk to each other. They use digital tools for communication at all levels of the workplace. They work with a wide circle of people all over the world. Let's call this Workplace 3.0. Again, in the last 50 years, we have made a revolution in the workplace. This has happened all over the world: Asia, Europe, South America, North America. a new workplace, a new set of tools, a new set of skills. Now, let us take our camera into the schools to see if education has changed to match the new economy. And what do we see? We see students in large groups using paper and pencil tools. In the schools of today, they all do the same thing at the same time. They enjoy few connections with the world outside. They are closely supervised. They use paper and pencil tools. They are not happy. Students do the same things all day long. They do not talk with each other. They are not happy. What's wrong? The schools of today do not match the workplace of today. Education has not changed to meet the needs of the world around it. Today's workplace demands people who can work in small groups and solve problems. People who can use digital tools. People who are prepared to perform many different tasks during the day. Without close supervision, they're expected to work on their own. They're expected to have connections all over the world in many forms in order to get their work done. That's Workplace 3.0. And yet, most of our schools are not doing this. We have not, in our schools, invented Education 3.0. Most of us are still doing Education 2.0. The question for us, and the question for you at this conference, is what should Education 3.0 look like? In order to produce the kind of citizens that we need for our new democracies and workers that we need for our new economy and scholars that we need for our new universities, in order to produce those kinds of people for the future, what should our school look like? So now I'm going to take the camera into some schools of today. And I want to ask the question, is this what Education 3.0 should look like? And then I want you to ask the question, what should Education 3.0 look like in your school? Is this Education 3.0? Students are working in small groups, sometimes with the teacher. Is this Education 3.0? When does it begin? When do we begin preparing the citizens and scholars and workers for the new world? Do we begin at 5 years old, or do we wait until they get to the university? Most of the skills for Education 3.0, for the Workplace 3.0, must begin early. Is this Education 3.0? This is a school in Santa Catarina State, in the southern part of Brazil, that's trying to invent Education 3.0. And they brought together professors and students and people from the business community in Florianopolis to reinvent the school of the future. Is this what it will look like? Students working with mobile technologies in small groups? Or does it look like this? Is technology necessary for Education 3.0? Is it always there, or only there sometimes? What are the important elements of Education 3.0? Does it look like this? This is every professor's nightmare, to see all of his students come to class armed with a mobile device and sitting there. But I wonder, looking at this picture, are these students being prepared for Workplace 3.0? Does the large lecture hall have a place anymore now that we can put much more information on the network? Do we need to sit in places like this? Even if we have the technology, is this Education 3.0? Or does it look more like this? These students in a high school in New York State are programming a robot to follow a path. They're programming it with a language that involves logic and mathematics and syntax. It involves mechanical work as well as computer programming, as well as mathematics, as well as the arts. Is this Education 3.0? Are they learning to work in small groups? Are they learning to solve problems? Are they learning to use digital tools? Does Education 3.0 look like this? Lots of technology. But what the student is doing an addition problem on the big screen. Is technology alone the answer for Education 3.0? And how about this? This was a Japanese magazine 50 years ago. This was their prediction of what our schools would look like today. Has this come true? Is this what we mean by Education 3.0? You see, everyone has a slightly different idea of what Education 3.0 should look like. And your task as the leader of your school back home is to think about, while you're at this conference, think about what Education 3.0 should look like at your school. What do you need to do differently to prepare your students for Workplace 3.0? Does it look like this? Mobile technologies, the subject of this year's symposium, are very important. They free the professor and the student from the library and from the lecture hall if they're used properly. But tablets alone do not make Education 3.0. Education 3.0 is preparing citizens and workers. We need much more than the technology to make this happen. We need people in schools, teachers and students, who work in different ways. What is the role of the teacher in Education 3.0? Does the teacher work like I am today, sitting in front of hundreds of people giving a lecture? Or would it be better if you could listen to my podcast at home and then come here and engage in a discussion about Education 3.0? What's the role of the teacher? Should the teacher be working with small groups of students, helping them to solve problems, rather than standing in front and lecturing a large group? Do your students need to be in your classroom? Can you teach students in a different country, from a different culture? How many of you know how to teach in a situation where your students are at the other end of a video conference? We did an experiment in 2004. We had professors in France and in the USA teaching students in France, Algeria, and China through video conferencing and internet. A master's degree course in computer and communications engineering. All of us in the experiment had to learn a new way of teaching for students that we never met face to face. In Education 3.0, do we have classrooms? Or do the students do most of their learning outside of the classroom, in small groups? This is the front steps of the City University of New York, where I work. If you watch the students, they're always at work. They have their mobile technologies, they work together in small groups everywhere. In the library, on the subway, at home, in the classroom. Is that Education 3.0? What is the role of the student in Education 3.0? What does a student need to be doing in order to be prepared for the workplace 3.0? Should they be working in small groups, preparing a presentation to send to some other students in another country? Should they be getting ready for a video conference with their professor who may be off doing his research in Europe or Africa, and yet his students can maintain their contact through mobile devices and through video conferencing? Is this what Education 3.0 looks like? Are these students preparing themselves for the new workplace? Or does it look like this? Does it begin very early? Do we start students working in small groups and solving problems at a very early age so that when they get to the university, they are good at it? That they can work in a small group and solve problems? What is your dream for Education 3.0? What is your vision? If you could reinvent your university or your school to follow the principles of Education 3.0, what would it look like? What is the picture in your imagination of what your school would look like if it followed the principles of Education 3.0? We have worked with schools all over the world to help them think about Education 3.0 and what it will look like in their school. We've done 12 schools in New York City, schools in Texas, USA, New York State, Denver, Vermont, Massachusetts, Arizona. We've worked with schools in Denmark, in China, in Santa Catarina State, in Brazil, in California, in Hong Kong. And just recently, we came back from Jakarta and Singapore and Bangkok, where the schools in Asia, which are also fast-growing economies like yours, active democracies, they are reinventing their schools along the lines of Education 3.0. It's happening all over the world. And I challenge you at this conference for the next 3 days to gather ideas on what Education 3.0 could look like at your school. Now I want to share with you a vision. Each school that we work with creates a vision. We call it a day in the life of a student at Education 3.0. And we have the students and the teachers and the directors of the school get together and paint a picture of what Education 3.0 should look like in their school. I'm going to share with you the picture that was painted by one school in New York City. They did this 3 years ago, so the school is now up and running. And this was their dream of what Education 3.0 would look like in their high school. And they are telling you their story as a day in the life of a student. So let's follow Sally as she wakes up in the morning. It's 6:30 in the morning. Sally wakes, and she wakes to her mobile device. What she gets is an alarm on her mobile device. And what comes through is not a note from her teacher or her mother, but a note from a fellow student. Sally, you have not done the work on the group project. We must get this finished today. You were supposed to do some research on PCBs in the water supply, the pollution of the water supply. Have you got your project done? So Sally is awakened by another student with her mobile device. And the students in Sally's school work on projects together. 5 or 6 students are grouped together and assigned a project that solves a problem in the real world and at the same time involves mathematics, literature, science, and the arts. So Sally goes to work. She takes up another mobile device and she begins her research online. It's only 6:30 in the morning, but Sally is already hard at work on her schoolwork. She researches the level of pollution that's allowed in the water by the Environmental Protection Government Agency. Now it's 20 minutes before 7. Sally goes to work. She takes her laptop and connects it to the city's water quality metering station. The data on chemicals in the water is all online, and Sally can tap into it. She takes a reading and finds that the level of PCBs in the water is very high, much higher than what's allowed by the Environmental Protection Agency. So she gathers the data, she puts it in her spreadsheet, she does some data analysis, and then she sends a note, not to her teacher, but to the members of her project group. In Sally's school, project groups work together without a lot of supervision from their teachers. They are expected to solve their problems themselves. She sends her findings to the other members of her group. She's now worried that her water is very polluted. It's 5 minutes before 7. Sally takes this data analysis and sends it to her personal academic portfolio. This is a record of her accomplishments in school. In order to graduate and get her diploma, she must fulfill 25 accomplishments. One of them is in data analysis. So she submits her report to her portfolio. Later, a teacher will look at it and determine whether it meets the requirements for Sally to get her diploma. It's 7 o'clock. It's time to start the trip to school. Sally practices her violin. She eats breakfast, but she does not drink any water from the tap. She gets on the subway. That's how students in New York get to school. It's 20 after 7. She takes out of her pocket her smartphone, and immediately, as soon as she turns it on, she sees something sent by her teacher. It's a debate. It's a recording of a debate in the legislature about the Clean Water Bill, the new law that would restrict the amount of pollution in the water supply. It was sent to her by her teacher. Her teachers have a different role in school. They're very active, but they're active behind the scenes. They find things that are useful to help the students solve the projects and send them the information they need, which appears on their mobile devices. Sally listens to the debate from the legislature. The train is delayed. On the same mobile device, Sally sees that her reading for English literature is also there for her to read. all of the materials at Sally's school are online. Everything that she needs to read, all of her assignments, all of her project definition is all online. There are no more textbooks. She hardly does anything on paper. She reads a chapter in her literature textbook. And of course, this is literature about man's relationship with nature. The literature that she reads is related to the science that she's studying, which is related to the social studies, the government studies that she's doing. Her teachers conspire with each other to set up a curriculum in which all of the subjects relate to each other. Sally finally arrives at school just before 8 o'clock. The first thing she does at school is to meet with her project group. They use the library. No one reads the books anymore. They use the library to have their meeting. They discuss what they've found overnight in their homework. And they divide up the task among them because their project is due. Their project must be complete by 3 o'clock this afternoon. They share their information. Sally goes to her next class, which is a large group math class in the auditorium. The speaker appears on the big screen. It's a scientist, a mathematician from the Environmental Protection Agency, who is explaining statistical sampling in environmental work. There are 125 students in the class. Sally asks a question. She sends the data up to the big screen so that the scientist in Washington, D.C. can see it. And Sally asks, is this a good sample? Can I rely on the sample that I took this morning to draw some conclusions? And the scientist, the mathematician, says, well, it doesn't look like you have enough data. Talk with your math teacher. Now that class is over. Sally goes to her next class. But before she does, she takes her data and sends it to another student to get some advice. She knows this student is good with statistics. You see, in Sally's school, students rely on each other first before they go to the teacher. Now, we followed Sally for about 2 hours. The rest of the story takes her all the way through school and home and till when she goes to bed. But I think you see that Sally's life is very different from the lives of most of our students. This is an example of what I'd like to see you do for your school. Tell a story about a day in the life of your students in Education 3.0. Well, I thank you very much for listening to my ideas. I will be here today and tomorrow and Friday. I look forward to discussing with you how you can make Education 3.0 happen at your school. I thank Professor Xavier for inviting me to this conference, and I thank all of you for listening today. Thank you very much.